Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey Besters in the Southern Highlands. How are you, Tracey?
I'm doing really well, Darin, and it's beautiful autumn weather in the Southern Highlands with the lovely colours of the trees changing. One of my favourite times of year down here. But anyway, I'm good, thank you.
Magnificent. Well, a bit cold for me, so I don't think I'll be visiting the Southern Highlands anytime soon now. But as usual, we do have a sponsor for this episode of the podcast, and it's brought to you by Superfund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Superfund Property Valuations your number one choice for all your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details online using the required form at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And as I always say, we really appreciate their continued support. And again, I can't emphasize how important getting your asset valuations, particularly for property, right for your super fund, not just in the lead up to year end, but really the whole time. And of course, we will actually be touching on a little bit of that today, which is an even better segue. But just as a reminder, viewers of the last episode will know that we started covering off some year-end strategies for SMSS. And Tracey very kindly broke them down into sort of three areas. And we started off with what you must do before the end of the financial year. So the list was way too extensive to cover off in one episode. So we kind of broke the first bit down into two episodes, and this is the second episode of what you must do before the 30th of June hits. So we'll be covering quite a lot of stuff today, Trace. A lot of things to tick off there.
Yeah, absolutely, Darin. And I think that this is all about making sure that the SMSF is in the cleanest bill of health, if you like, before the end of June, which is good for you as a trustee, also good for your accountants that you're working with and your advisors that you're working with. So last episode, we talked about all of the must-do things to consider around getting money in and contributions to the fund. So we covered off all of that. So today I want to just chat with you, Darin, about some of the things about getting money out and, a few other things, including some valuation discussions. So looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're going to discuss, and particularly the first point, really goes to the general health of your SMSF as well. I mean, the approaching 30th of June is always probably a good trigger point or a good time or a line in the sand to say that no, I've got to address these sorts of things. But it's not just for the end of the financial year. A lot of the things that we're talking about here is actually good for the general health of your fund, that so that you know that, right, I'm on top of this sort of stuff. I know where I'm at with this. I looked at it last April or May. And I know, and it can even be to alert you to what steps you need to take immediately, in the future to say that, okay, this is a bit of a problem. Not necessarily for year end, but a problem. It's an issue that needs to be addressed very soon.
Yeah,
So the
absolutely.
problem, sorry, Trace.
No, that's fine. I totally agree with you. And I think that there are multiple trigger points in the SMSF and, starting a pension, stopping a pension, getting money in, getting money out, etc. But the year end just is a really nice time to visit some of these things. Hence we've got our must do, should do, and could do kind of, things that we break it down to. So absolutely a trigger point for end of June. And I think if you've met some of these things, if they're relevant to you as a trustee, you've met those things, then yeah, you don't need to address them until something else is a trigger point moving forward or at next 30 June.
So we're going to kick it off with one of these more general areas, but a great opportunity to revisit and continue to revisit this because this is really important. And that's to do with the capacity of the trustees of the fund, isn't it, Tracey?
Yeah, it is, Darin. And you might think, well, that's a really weird thing to put in as a must do for year-end planning. What's trustee capacity got to do with anything? But, when we think about the definition of an SMSF, Darin, it's all around our trustees being able to make decisions. And if they don't have the competency because of some disability in terms of their mental health or their age, we see dementia is a really big thing that comes into this sort of area, then I just think that 30 June is a really good time to say, look, are we good? Do all of the trustees have capacity? Is there something happening with one or more of the trustees of the fund that we need to address this so that we don't fall foul of the definition of an SMSF, or we don't actually have the strategy in place around that controller fund, around who's going to be able to make the decisions if one of the trustees/members can't make a decision. So does everyone have the capacity mentally to be able to continue to make these decisions? If not, now's a great time to think about what we need to do. And that's where we step into the enduring power of attorney kind of realm, and we make sure that we've got those enduring power of attorneys in place so that if we can't make a decision for whatever reason, that somebody else can, and our super fund can continue to operate seamlessly.
Yeah, so important. That ongoing operation of the fund is probably something that people don't really consider when looking at this sort of thing. But if a member dies, or God forbid a member dies, or something like that, if you don't have that ability to have that continuity, again, you're going into a whole world of hurt that you really don't want to experience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, one of the kind of war stories, Darin, that we often talk about. I recently had a very dear client of mine pass away, and he actually went into palliative care for a period of time before he passed away. And, thankfully, we had put in place all of this kind of, strategy pieces around if he wasn't able to make a decision, who was going to do that for him. So we had all of the documentation. If we didn't have the documentation, we would have been at a stalemate in his SMSF, because the decisions had to be made whilst he was seeking treatment and whilst he was in palliative, and then, unfortunately passed away from there. But it was just reassuring for his family that we were able to just seamlessly, do what we needed to do. So just a good reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I always allude to with the sponsor's message, valuations are really important too, especially around this time with so many other thresholds that are dependent upon, what your asset values are and whatever. So absolutely getting those valuations spot on, right? Well, around
Yeah.
this time of year is critical, isn't it, Tracey?
Yeah, absolutely, Darin. And, we used to have this kind of rule of thumb, if you like, that you only needed to have a market valuation or appraisal every 3 years, blah, 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 and all that sort of kind of old talk. But now it really is an annual requirement to look at the valuation, and not just for 30th of June. If we're starting a pension, we need to also look at valuations when we start a pension. And Darin, I had a conversation with one of my clients just in the last couple of weeks, year-end kind of conversation. And crazily, the property that he has in his fund has almost doubled in value.
Wow.
So that causes all sorts of other conversations that we now need to have around liquidity, because he's under account-based pensions, so we've got to take those minimum pension payments out. We've now got this whole conversation around, do we have enough rental income coming through in order to be able to meet these pension payments? And if not, what does that look like for him? What are the strategies to employ in order to be able to make his life a little bit easier? So that valuation piece is so important. And now's the time to start thinking about, what do we need to do? Who do we need to engage to be able to get these valuations done? And what impact does that have? And that's why we talk about it now. To me, there's not much point, having a valuation, yes, dated 30th of June, but doing it in October or November or December when the annual accounts are done, because you've missed the opportunity perhaps to then look at what you should do and what you can do if that valuation piece has varied quite considerably from the year before. So absolutely, market vals are a big thing for 30 June, but it's not just because of the actual requirement to have them done. It's more so that you know what the state of play is.
Yeah, that's so important. And for regular viewers and listeners to this podcast, you'll have got a great sense about how so many of the separate topics that we discuss actually intertwine with one another. I mean, valuations, you mentioned that from the point of liquidity and obviously starting a pension, that sort of thing. But valuations also affect your total super balance. And then your total super balance will affect whether or not you can make certain types of contributions um, at that time or in the coming year, or whether or not something needs to be flagged. In-house assets, that's another one where, if the valuations fluctuate, is your is your threshold, that 5% threshold, has that adjusted? Again, that's another thing that you're gonna, if you don't do valuations, and it's kind of, I'm glad you mentioned the myth because that is definitely the old, "Oh, I don't have to get one. I only have to get one every 3 years." Even the ATO has dispelled that myth to say that, well, no, that's not actually correct. But even without that, if you leave it for 3 years, how do you know whether or not your total super balance exceeds the threshold? And what happens if it does, and then you've made contributions, and it's like, oh no, well, what do I do now? How do I wind that back? So again, it's just good housekeeping, really, just to make sure that you don't fall foul of any of these rules, and you've got peace of mind there.
Yeah, absolutely, Darin. And I think that total super balance has some confusion around it, doesn't it? Because when people get total super balance confused with the transfer balance cap, so one's getting money in, one's getting money out, and we've experienced that even at your trustee events the last couple of years, where some of the people in the audience have just been a little, and it is confusing. I'm not saying it's not, just confused about what one cap is and another cap. And there was a comment made some time ago, I think, that the total super balance is easy. You just have to look on the ATO portal to find it. But if your accounts haven't been done yet, and we're at the end of April now, accountants are still finishing off SMSFs. If your accounts are not done yet, you actually don't know what your total super balance is at 30th of June last year. So therefore, what does that mean for your contributions this year? So everything has a flow-on effect in the SMSF world. It's like this big, pebble drop in your pond, and it kind of, just flows out from there. And there's not one thing that I can think of. There's not one thing that I can think of right now that is standalone.
And
Everything.
of course, from a compliance perspective, always better to be ahead of the curve than chasing your tail. You just don't want to be
Absolutely.
chasing your tail.
Absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely important. Now, again, this one actually probably is more specific to year ends, and so I'm talking about ensuring that you've made the minimum pension payments if you have a pension in place in your fund.
Yeah, absolutely, Darin. So what you should be doing now is absolutely, if you've got account-based pensions, or even if you've got a transition to retirement pension, and I'm also going to throw legacy pensions into the mix there, Darin. So anyone who's got those complying legacy pensions, market-linked pensions, whatever terminology you want to place on them, now's the time to be actually ensuring that not only have you met the minimum. If we're talking about account-based pensions, we have a minimum. Depending on your age, we have maximum of 100%. So you can take all of your money out as a pension payment if you choose to, making sure you've met the minimum. But if you've got a transition to retirement income stream or these legacy pensions, making sure that you don't exceed the maximum because those actually do have a maximum, because we know that the ATO's position is very clear in the updated tax ruling around when does a pension start and when does a pension cease. And the ATO are very clear around, if you exceed, if you breach the pension standards, i.e. you don't meet the minimum or you take too much, if there is a maximum, then you may actually have inadvertently caused your pension to stop, which then has lots of flow-on effects. So then has all of these other, consequences for that. And yes, you might be able to have a situation, Darin, if you haven't met your minimum. So meeting the minimum is the most important, of course. If you've not met your minimum, yes, there might be some dispensation that the ATO can give you to say, well, it's a one-off, it's a one-off discretionary thing that they can, allow it to go through. But if it's a repeat thing, or if you've totally messed it up and you're not even close to the minimum, then the chances are that you don't have a pension any longer, you don't have your exempt current pension income deductions, and you can't then just continue on for the next financial year. You're then going to have to actually do the paperwork to commute the pension, roll it back into accumulation and start again. That all then has a whole lot of other issues, and market valuations then come into play with that as well. So you don't want to cease your pension just because you haven't met the minimum. That's not a good thing to do.
No, and while this is probably a discussion for another day, uh, the rules have actually changed last year, was it? It may have come into effect on the 1st of July 2024, but the way that the ATO treats pensions that haven't met the minimum has pretty much totally been turned on its head now. So
That's
while
right.
before it wasn't that much of an imposition if you did it, now it really is bad. And from a TRIS perspective, you mentioned not only minimum payment but maximum payment. If you exceed that maximum payment, then there are situations where you can actually go down the illegal early access route. If you're looking at some remedies to how do I address this or don't address it, as the case may be. And again, that is another whole world of hurt that you don't want to be in, and particularly that one because the ATO, apart from valuations that I keep mentioning, the ATO is absolutely red hot on illegal early access. If you don't keep up to it, obviously we do. There are announcements being made all the time about people being busted for illegal early access. And of course, that comes with scheme promoters and that sort of stuff that the ATO is acutely aware of and trying to stamp out. So any excuse to go down that route, they will come after you and make sure that you do the right thing. So again, absolutely critical to get these things in place.
It
Um,
really is, Darin.
as
It
you,
really
as
is.
you
And just expanding a little bit on that transition to retirement income stream, or a TTR or TRIS or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, if you take more than the maximum, then it's only up to the maximum that may be considered to be a pension payment. Anything over and above that, you've then got to think about, well, is that a lump sum payment to you? And if it's a lump sum payment to you, then you have to have met a condition of release in order to get that lump sum, which is what you're alluding to. If
Yeah.
you haven't met a condition of release, then the ATO literally could hit you with illegal early access because you haven't actually met the criteria. So anybody, please, if you've got an account-based pension, a transition to retirement income stream, you want to take a lump sum, you've got a market-linked pension or a complying pension, a legacy pension, please, now's the time to be having that conversation with your advisors and your accountants to confirm what the minimum is, what the maximum is, compare it to what you've actually taken, and make sure that you have met those parameters before end of June. So with my clients, now's the time that I'm checking with them what they've taken out, telling them what the parameters are, and making sure, just reminding them of what they still need to take between now and 30 June, or reminding them that they're at their limit and not to take anything else.
Yep, so important. Now the next area that we're going to go into probably is a nice fit with the year-end strategy or year-end strategies and the must-do things that you need to have completed before the 30th of June, and that's really a review of your investment strategy. You can do it any time, of course, but this is probably a neat reminder and a neat time to do it, isn't it, Tracey?
Yeah, it is, Darin, and it kind of fits within the whole, trustee status. Investment strategies. Yes, one of my clients said to me, "What if I review my investment strategy every day of the year?" And I said, "Well, you can do that. Just make sure that you've documented the fact that you have reviewed it every day. And if you are happy to do resolutions every day of the year to say that you've reviewed it, then all the power to you, kind of thing." So you can literally review your investment strategy as many times as you want. account. I think the big things with the investment strategy side of things is around confirming that confirming that all of the investments that you've made are actually in line with the investment strategy. So I had a situation a couple of years ago where someone said to me, "Oh, we've invested in some crypto." And I'm like, "Yeah, great, no worries at all. Does your investment strategy allow you to invest in crypto?" And they went, "Oh, I don't know." So that's probably not the best conversation to have. You really
No.
want to be having the conversation before you do the investment, not after doing the investment. So if you want to invest in something, make sure it's allowed in your investment strategy. It's not hard to update it. It's not hard to review it. It's not hard to, amend what you need to amend. But yeah, just make sure that you understand that a strategy normally comes before the act of investing.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And the worst thing is if you make mistakes in this area, there's nowhere really to run because it's so obvious. I mean, Tracey, there's been a recent case called the Merchant case. Um, and that had a range of SMSF aspects to it. We're not going to go into that. But one of the ones was they got picked up. The SMSF got picked up because the investment strategy had clearly not been reviewed, or it had been reviewed, but it hadn't been signed off properly or whatever. But it was something as basic as, and we're not talking about, crypto, which is a new sort of asset class. The investment strategy in that case had the SMSF can have 0% property holding of real estate assets or property, and it had a property.
Yeah.
Like it had invested in a property. So it's like, well, that's not really, it's kind of on a whim that there's these new assets that I want to get into and whatever, or an alternate asset or something that you could say that, well, it was a bit obscure and, I didn't think about that. I mean,
Mm.
owning a property is pretty basic in the SMSF. If you reckon you've reviewed it and it says, 0% property, then there's not much coming back from that. That is pretty black and white, you know?
Yeah, property is a pretty plain vanilla investment for an SMSF, isn't it, Darin? So, and I'm personally not a fan, Darin, of having kind of those asset allocation tables in my investment
Yeah,
strategies that
yeah.
say naught to this percent or whatever, because you can easily fall foul of them if you're not,
Oh,
really
yeah.
on top of things. Case in point with the merchant case. But it's more around and the ATO, I think, have got some really good guidelines around investment strategies. So if any of our listeners haven't, logged onto the ATO website and had a bit of a look around the investment strategy, they're pretty good. The ATO's information on this is pretty good. So I had a situation a few years ago as well where the investment strategy was 0 to 100 for every asset class. Now, is that really a strategy? I don't really think that's a strategy, Darin. I'm not sure about you, but 0 to
Uh,
100, every asset
sounds
class. Well, just do what you want.
sounds to me like it's more of a list of asset classes rather than an investment strategy.
Correct, correct.
Well,
So
how
I
many
think
can I think of? 0 to 100 for everyone. Great.
exactly, exactly. So I think that, the investment strategy, great time to review it. Make it meaningful for you. Like, yes, it's a compliance thing to have the investment strategy in place. You're required to do that. But like a lot of compliance things, I think we can actually make them really useful and meaningful to us as trustees and members of the fund, and make it something that, kind of, aligns with what you're actually doing is the point there.
Yeah, 100%. And isn't it funny, before we move on, as we move on to our next point, we're already demonstrating to you the interaction of some of these strategies that
Yeah.
that you should be looking at before year end. Because the next thing we're going to quickly discuss is in-house assets. And of course, that's got everything to do with your valuation because of
Correct.
that 5% limit.
Yeah, exactly, Darin. And this is the ripple effect, isn't it, in the SMSF world? So if you have an in-house asset, the point here for year end is if you were above so if you've got an in-house asset, that's step number one. Making sure that nothing has changed with your in-house asset. So let's say that you had a related investment. It wasn't an in-house asset, but it's now become an in-house asset. So that's probably one thing to confirm. Sorry, if you not related asset, that's probably a bad example. But if you had an investment in a unit trust that wasn't related to you, because of the virtue of the way that related parties and part eight associates work. But now it is, for some reason, then you may have triggered an in-house asset, unbeknownst. But also, if you had an in-house asset, then you've got to get it to below that 5% by 30 June. So yes, your valuations come into play here, but you also may need to divest of part or all of that particular type of investment to be able to come back below that 5%. So in-house assets is an absolute trigger for 30 June kind of strategies, and not even strategies, but compliance, to make sure that we still, if we had it, if we're over 5% at 30 June 2024, and we're still over 5% at 30 June 2025, we're going to be in all sorts of hurt with the ATO and the auditors, because they will have a contravention, no doubt, because we haven't given effect to that written strategy that we committed to with our auditor and the ATO to deal with that 5% issue. And we talked about all of that in the podcast that we did around in-house assets.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, just a reminder that you need to give yourself a good bit of leeway if you are coming into issues with in-house assets, because it's not always as easy as just a share portfolio that trades daily on the ASX. So,
Okay.
I could say, oh, I've got a bit of an issue. I'll just sell those shares. What if it's an illiquid asset like a property or something like that? You can't just click your fingers and get rid of that out of your fund if you do need to divest yourself from that holding. So you need to also keep into account that there needs to be some leeway. Of course, the trustee should know how their portfolio is constructed, but again, something that needs to be considered is that leeway of, oh, if I have to do it, if I have to, sell some assets, let's identify the ones that if it takes a long time, I better get on my bike now and start pedaling pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly, Darin. And I think that we'd have to be living under a rock, wouldn't we, to know that, or to not know that the volatility in the markets have been fairly all over the place lately. So if that volatility continues to run between now and 30 June, then we may actually have this issue where we don't know what our imbalances are going
Yeah.
to be,
Yep.
and that volatility that could drop considerably at the 30th of June. So we do need to have a plan in place if we've got that 5% issue going on.
Now you mentioned related parties with
I did.
the in-house assets that we just talked about, but the next thing you wanted to discuss was to do with related party LRBAs. Now this
Yeah.
obviously isn't going to affect everybody because the percentage of SMSFs using LRBAs are not that significant, certainly not as significant as some people would like you to think it is. But
Yeah.
still, no less important to make sure that this area is revisited.
Yeah, absolutely, Darin. And I think that this is on my year-end checklist, even though it doesn't apply to everybody, because it does apply to some people. So this is where you have a related party limited recourse borrowing. So if you've borrowed from a bank, this doesn't apply to you. If you've borrowed from yourself, and you in fact have become the bank, then this related party compliance checklist item is very relevant. And it's really around, have you met the safe harbor provisions? So there were some safe harbor provisions introduced quite some time ago, and that requires principal and interest payments at the benchmark interest rate that the ATO set. You must make sure that you've made those payments. And if you haven't made those payments, you've breached the safe harbor provisions. And we've used the word hurt a few times in the podcast today, Darin, and I feel like we're doing a big stick as opposed to a carrot this time. But there is definitely a world of hurt if you fail to meet the safe harbor provisions. So if you've got a related party LRBA, again, now's the time to be chatting with your accountants and your administrators to make sure that you have met those payments and you've taken into consideration the changes in benchmark interest rates.
Yeah, it probably, as a rule of thumb, it just really comes down to making sure it's pretty much on commercial terms. I mean,
Yeah.
if you do that, you can't really go wrong. I know there's a few nuances that we won't go into today where you could argue that, oh, but I could get a lower rate than the prescribed safe harbor rate. And yeah, there are legitimate arguments for that. But basically, as a rule of thumb, if you've got all of those commercial components, in the related party LRBA, you shouldn't really have too many issues with that, which is That's a pretty easy rule of thumb, really.
Yeah, it is. That one is pretty straightforward. And I think if you have one of these related party LRBAs, because we don't see them so often anymore, quite simply because of the benchmark interest rates
Yeah.
that the ATO
Yeah.
prescribe are significantly higher, or have been significantly higher than what you could get from a commercial term with a bank. So we don't see them as much anymore. But still, if you have it in place, you'll know that you have one in place.
Yeah.
And so you will know what the requirements are. But
Yeah.
just a reminder, as part of our, compliance checklist, to get that one sorted.
So while we're on related parties, what about trust distributions?
Yeah, trust distribution. So this one is equally as important. So if your SMSF has invested in a related trust, so we call these a 1322C regulated trust, it's really important that you actually, if there's a trust distribution from 2024, make sure that that trust distribution has been paid physically to the SMSF as part of your year-end planning. So if you don't pay it out, then the risk is that you've actually provided financial assistance to the trust. So we then go into, again, ripple effect, we then go into all of those breaches around providing financial assistance to a member or a related party of a member. So it kind of opens up a whole, again, a can of hurt. So yeah, just again, make sure trust distributions, make sure they're paid out. So my checklist with clients is pretty straightforward. Here's your minimum pension payments. This is how much you need to pay. Here's your trust distribution from last year. Make sure this amount is paid. Like, it's pretty straightforward. Tick, 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 all done, dusted. We can move on for another year. But yeah, if you've got, again, you'll know if you've got a related trust related party trust distribution to pay, and please make sure that that is done by the 30th of June. It needs to be done as soon as practicable. So, 30th of June is kind of the D date for that.
Now, just as a slight segue here, there could be, and that's a big emphasis on could be, a significant development in this space, but that sort of issue is still being argued through the courts at the moment. If you hear any references to it, it's known as the Bendel case. Still being argued through the courts from an ATO perspective, but there could be some good news for trustees in this area. But again, don't take it to the bank until the final legal hearing is made and decided upon, and then the ATO will have its direction almost really dictated to it to say that no, this is how the law will be applied from here on in. So just one to keep an eye on. But we'll keep
Yeah.
moving on. You want to raise rental payments as well, didn't you, Trace?
Yeah, so this is another one, Darin, around if you've got a related party. These are all related party transactions, really. So if you've got a related party that is, say, renting a commercial factory from you, so you've got business premises, please make sure the rental payments are made. And make sure that it is at market value. So market valuations are really important from an asset perspective, but equally as important, Darin, from a rental perspective and a lease perspective as well, because if we have underpaid market rates of rent, then we potentially are providing financial accommodation to our members or the business. So we kind of get ourselves into that same realm as the trust distribution conversation. So likewise, if we're paying more than rental lease payment, market rates of lease payments or rental payments, then we might be actually in a situation where we're making contributions to the fund, and then we'd have to actually look at our contribution caps. So we want to be making market rates of rent payments and making sure that those rent payments are made. If for some reason we one of the things we look at as accountants is there 12 months of rent payments made? If there isn't 12 months of rent payments made, then why? What's happened here? And maybe it's just because it's crossed over 30 June and there's some reason for it. If there's something like that takes place and we haven't addressed it in our compliance must-dos, then we're going to need some supporting resolutions to explain what's happened. So easier not to have to go down that path, Darin. It's easier to actually make sure that the rent payments are made, and also that you have a legally binding rental agreement in place. That's really important as well. So if the rental agreement that you had or the lease that you had has expired in the last 12 months or is due to expire in the next 6 to 12 months, what's the plan there? is there a clause in that lease agreement that says you can continue on a month-by-month basis, or is it going to cease completely? And then we may not have a legally binding rental agreement. So we need to get some advice on that.
Yeah, again, so important to maintain the discipline of treating these things as a strictly commercial transaction. I know
Mhm.
within an SMSF, it's slightly more difficult to stick to that discipline because of the different hats you wear, probably because of the different relationships you have with other people, which is slightly unique in a superannuation sense. But nevertheless, it is a discipline that you really should train yourself to adhere to. And again, if you do that, there should be no compliance issues. You can't always give a 100% guarantee, but you'll be on the right track. And of
Agreed.
course, to finish it all off, Tracy,
Yeah.
this is probably one point that we hammer home, and you've already mentioned it a few times now, to do with year-end planning, but just the general housekeeping and governance of your fund, which is a great one. And of course, I'm talking about documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, documentation, I don't even know how many times I've mentioned it in the last half an hour, but I'm sure it's been a few. Supporting documentation, you've got to have contemporaneous documentation that shows what decisions you made. And I think, did this come up in the merchant case a little bit as well around, what documentation was there? And,
Yes, yes, it
what
did. Yeah,
is
it
the
was one
ATO?
of the aspects with the documentation about being properly executed, whereby merchant who was the trustee had documents signed on his behalf by he'd almost delegated it to one of his close lieutenants, I suppose you could
Mhm.
call them. But in the end, he himself hadn't signed it very much, and he didn't seem to have any idea of what the documents had stipulated. Which
Right.
again, that doesn't really give you any excuse. I mean, you got to be across it, don't you?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You do have to be across it. And the best way to show what your intention was and what decision you made is the documentation we're talking about. So the resolutions that you have, or minutes of a meeting that you're having as trustees, to explain why you made the decisions you made, or the fact that you actually did make a decision. The investment strategies, pension documentation, all of that sort of stuff is really important to have. If you've got an notice of intent to claim a super contribution as a personal deduction, then all of this documentation is crucial, because that's what your accountants and the auditors, and ultimately the ATO, if it gets to that stage, that's what they're going to rely upon. So can you have an investment strategy that's just in your mind? Well, perhaps, but how's anyone going to know about it, right? So
Yeah,
you
exactly.
could have things in your mind, but if you don't have it documented, then there is no evidence of it.
To the letter of the law, you don't need to. It doesn't actually stipulate you have to write down your investment strategy. But seriously, if you have to have interactions with auditors and other compliance parties with your fund, how is somebody going to read your mind that you had this in your mind? You can't. I mean, I think it's actually a flaw in the system that it's not stipulated that you have to. Well, it's almost like an unwritten rule, pardon the pun, that
Yeah.
you do have to write down your investment strategy. So I don't understand why the laws or the regulations don't actually stipulate this, because it would make it a hell of a lot easier, because it would just take out the fact that, oh, but I can argue that I don't actually have to write it down. Who's that helping?
Yes.
Nobody. And again, going back to your war story, if you like, or your client story, had the documentation been reviewed and properly put in place, they probably would know that the investment strategy didn't allow for or may not have allowed for the investment in cryptocurrency or some of those digital assets, which is a completely, really brand new asset class if we're looking at it from a SMSF perspective. So,
Yeah.
really important. Pretty easy, but and really important.
Yeah, it just seems that it's probably the most basic thing of everything we've talked about, is just making sure that you do have the supporting documents. And the best time to do the supporting documents is when you make the decision. But often that doesn't happen. Often it's overlooked. And so then you've got to, then support it a bit later down the track. But it's just the thing that we fall foul of all the time. If we go back and we're trying to piece something together, we're always looking for documents. So I think, it's an absolute must, Darin.
Do we
And
borrow
that's
from
starting
a
our month
refer
too.
Do we borrow references other people sort of make? There's a person in the industry who is very big on this repetitive theme, and this would be a slight variation of it, but are we suggesting document, document, document?
I think Scott will be very happy with that.
Yeah, Scott Hay Bartlam, if you're watching, shout out to you. He's always about read the deed, read the deed, read the deed. So we're saying document, document, document.
We are. Absolutely. And that's the end of our must-dos, Darin. So good
Brilliant.
job.
So the next time we're going to go on to should do's.
Yeah.
And that will be another category of things and good things because rather than, not having a focus on I have to do this. There's a little bit of flexibility with, yeah, I should do this and this will give me an advantage. So we're moving on to the upside of things rather than just having to do these or having to deal with some of these issues in the lead up.
Absolutely. The carrot,
Leading.
not the stick, Darin. The carrot, not the stick.
Exactly, exactly. We want to move on to the more of the carrot. So we're looking forward to doing that. But as usual, we've run out of time, unfortunately. So thank you again, Tracey, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise with us. I think it was very insightful.
My pleasure, Darin. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you also to my production team, obviously, for putting all of these podcasts together and for uploading them on social media and all of our other media mediums. But most of all, thank you very much to you for joining us and listening to us. Again, we hope we are providing you with some very useful information, and we hope you enjoy listening to or viewing these podcasts as much as we enjoy bringing them to you. Other than that, we look forward to seeing you again for the next episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And until then, travel safely and bye for now.
See you next time.